This October, darken Poe's chamber door as we celebrate 180 years of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Join us for the International Edgar Allan Poe Festival and Awards, sponsored by Wells Fargo. 3 days of Poe-themed festivities. General admission is free. Don't miss special ticketed events. Visit PoeFestivalInternational.org for tickets and information. Into my eyes. Listen to my voice. You are in Baltimore. You hear voices calling, nevermore, nevermore. The streets alive, a dream within a dream. And now, shadows lengthen. Night falls. In the distance, a dark and brooding hall. Yes, walk closer. All around you, trance and shadow, dreams within dreams. The doors open, and behold, a mesmeric revelation. Enter as one soul, leave as another, waltz among phantoms, sip potions red as your own beating heart. Lose yourself in the rhythm as Edgar Allan Poe's world closes in around you. And perhaps, like one of his tales, you will wake, not knowing if it was a dream or doom. The Black Cat Ball, Mesmeric Masquerade. For tickets and information, visit PoeFestInternational.org.
All right, so my name's Steve Boilard. My interest in Poe actually goes back to when I first went off to college many, many years ago. And I guess like so many people, you know, you're out on your own. You're kind of you're at a young age. You're trying to figure out, you know, your identity, your personality. And I came across a book in a used bookstore, and actually I still has a book here. It's this one right here. It's The Complete Tales of and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe from 1938. It's not just the stories themselves, but it's a way that Poe wrote that I just found I was transfixed by. And his his erudition, the imagery, but it's really his use of language just captivated me. And I said, I want to be able to do something like that. I had a short story called A Dying Wish that last year was a nominee for the Saturday Visitor Awards. Poe's Last Lament is, so this is my latest short story. It's a short story from Poe's perspective. It's written as Poe's memoir written from his deathbed. And I write this, I explained that I discovered this by accident a couple of years ago in an old Gold Rush era neo-Gothic church in the gold country here in California where I live. But I've always been intrigued by this enduring mystery of Poe's death, that the conflicting eyewitness accounts, the lack of a death certificate, his comments about the mysterious Reynolds. There's so many mysteries attendant to his death that seem to cry out for a creative spin. Last year's nomination, called A Dying Wish, which is written in the Poe style. It doesn't explicitly mention Poe, but it's written as a Poe story. And this year, which is a memoir of Poe, I want to add to that a third short story. This project would look at the blurred line between reality and dreams, or maybe reality and fantasy. I think it's a Poe topic that he's explored a number of times. The dream within a dream. There's a number of ways that Poe's kind of approached this. And I've got an idea for a story that would, I think, come across very much as a Poe story that would shine some interesting light on this boundary or this duality between waking and dreaming. So that's my project for next year. At the moment, however, I'm actually just finishing up another Poe project, which is, I call Potable Poe. It's a book of Poe cocktails. And the idea is I take 31 Poe short stories and a couple of poems, actually, and I create a cocktail based on each of those. And so for each entry, you get an excerpt from the original story. You get a little description of the backstory, what's this story about. You then get the cocktail and how the cocktail connects or expands upon the story. So all my books are on Amazon. So just look up Steve Boilard, Boilard. And I also have my own website, which is Waytrips, WAYTRIPS .travel.blog, which is the website I run. I have a running blog that I run of travels around the country, but on that, my books are there.
I'm a retired school teacher, but I've always had an interest in horror and Halloween, and I always worked that into my classroom if I could. And therefore, around Halloween time, it was always good to be in my classroom, although it was going to be a little bit weird. But I've loved ghost stories. I've loved horror. I've loved it of all types. And as I said, I loved Halloween. Having that background in literature, I thought, well, I'll just self-publish, or I'll see if I can get a publisher or whatever. But I'll write some short stories. Edgar, the title of my book, started out when I finally was ready to sit down and write it. I'd always had this fascination with the last few days, 10 days or so of Poe's life because of the mysterious circumstances about his death. I sat down to write it, and something happened that I cannot explain. Instead of it being the end of Poe's life, another idea evolved and developed, and that was the premise: what if Poe's scariest stories all were inspired by supernatural events that happened one summer when he was 15 years old living in Richmond, Virginia. That's the story that ended up happening. I wanted to make sure that it was making Poe and his content and the horror and the wonder of what he wrote accessible to all readers. And as a teacher of high school students, I found that Poe can be a challenging piece because it's older, the language is a bit antiquated, but the content's wonderful and it still captures people's minds and gets their imagination going, and you can get new viewers and new readers. But I wanted to make sure I made it accessible, and I wanted to incorporate things that people who like Poe and already were familiar with him might see as Easter eggs, that they would go, oh yeah, well, okay, yeah, I know that about Poe. But there are real people in Richmond, like the fact of the House of Moldavia, the relationship he had with his adopted father and mother. And one other thing, which I always felt like I was cheated because I didn't know this information growing up and loving Poe and loving his horror. I did not know that I think the real true love of his life was a woman that he met when he was 15, a girl, Elmira Royster, whom he wanted to marry, but then tragically was separated from. So even though I'm only writing about one summer in Edgar's life, it's the summer when he was 15, but Elmira figures as a very important character, as well as another friend who may or may not have, I may have exaggerated a little bit about the closeness of that relationship, but another male friend that he went to, excuse me, that also went to the University of Virginia when he did. I am definitely playing with the idea of expanding the story so that, and maybe making a trilogy of it, so that the second installment might be a phase of Poe's life when he was with Virginia and struggling so much as he did throughout his life, I think, to be recognized, to have his talent recognized, and the struggles that involved, but also incorporate the supernatural as I did with the first book. And let that cover that point, maybe up to Virginia's death, figure out what the time period should be for that. And then a third book, I'd go back to the original idea I had of covering Poe's death and those events in maybe the last 2 weeks of his life. Well, I do a number of things. The books are on Amazon, or all the things that I've written, and Edgar is too. A wonderful trailer that someone made, a wonderful woman made of that, Casey Clark. Take a look at that on my website, which is davidallenvoyles.com. And my name, Allen, is spelled different than Edgar's, but it's Allen, but davidallenvoyles.com. And on that page, you can also find other ways to follow me. I have, I think, a rather unique monthly newsletter called Dark Cycles.
Yeah, my name is Mario. As I mentioned a minute ago, I'm in this weird transition period. I just took the bar exam a couple weeks ago, and so I'm starting work on Tuesday, but I can't technically call myself a lawyer until I'm licensed. So as far as Poe goes, I bought an anthology back in 2016, and I think the first thing I read was The Black Cat. At that point, I hadn't read The Raven. I hadn't read anything famous yet, and I just started with The Black Cat. I loved it. I don't think I read The Raven maybe until like a year later. I was really into the short stories. I think I did The Black Cat first and then The Gold Bug second. Later, I got into the poems, and when I read The Raven, that's when I absolutely just fell in love with the writing, and I'm sure a lot of people have. And that prompted my entry into this competition, The Serpent. The poem is called The Serpent. I started writing this back in 2017. I wrote a really sloppy first draft. And after studying The Raven some more, I realized that although the poem, sounded okay to maybe an untrained ear, I was not following the rhyming and meter conventions that Poe used. And so I took a step back and I really just tried to understand how The Raven was written from a mechanical sense in terms of the meter in the rhyme scheme. I wrote this poem called The Serpent, which is about a man who, unlike the narrator in The Raven, who's, this Lenore person was presumably, dead or lost. The narrator, the serpent, feels as though he was betrayed by this character. So there's already like a thematic inverse between the raven and the serpent. And while the raven deals with like loss and mourning and sorrow, the serpent turns all of that on its head, and it's more about like vengeance and anger. There are two works that I've either attempted and or finished. So one was The Imp of the Perverse, which was a really cool like short story that had like an essay of like human nature embedded in it. I tried doing something very similar in a short story format. That will probably never see the light of day, but I have tried it. And then the other poem I really like is Ullalum. I've started that one. I haven't gotten very far in it, but if I were to pick up anything, it would definitely be either like returning to The Imp of the Perverse poem that I'm working, or short story I'm working on, or finishing the Ullalum inspired poem I'm working on. As far as following me goes, I don't really use social media, so you can't really follow me on social media very well. Eventually, I would like to write more, maybe get an author's website, but for now, there's no more way to follow me. Aside from like maybe a LinkedIn, if you can find that on the internet somewhere. But so that poem was published by a press called, I don't want to screw their name up. I think Quoth the Raven Press, and it was published in a volume called Evermore 4. And so if you go to Amazon, for instance, and type in Evermore 4, you should be able to find that volume pretty easily. As far as my work in general, I've also written a collection of children's poetry that if you want to check out, it's not macabre and it's not Poe related whatsoever, but if you need a break from all the dark stuff, you can check that out. That's called The Tempest Lullaby. You can find that on Amazon. I have a red cover with a wizard in front of it. Just children's poems and riddles. I'm going to give you a little palate cleanser from all the death macabre of Poe, if you want.
Hi, I'm Amanda Bowen. I am an author, and also I work with a local historical society. I got into Poe and his life and works basically through my mother, who was a huge horror fan, and she loved the classics. So I started reading them at a young age and got into adding Poe-like flourishes to my stories when I was pretty young. The book that I wrote, Evermore, is basically a gaslamp fantasy, is what you would call it, I guess. And it is about Edgar Allan Poe having not actually died in 1849, and instead being made immortal, and how he teams up with two other folks who have gone through the same process as him to track down the person who did it to them and stop their nefarious plans. It starts off with an accidentally immortal alchemist's assistant who has unwittingly discovered the secret of eternal life through a alchemical elixir. And she is tracking down her former boss, who has been trying to get the secret or discover the secret. And she comes across his latest victim, Edgar Allan Poe. And the two of them, along with an also very not dead Meriwether Lewis, of Lewis and Clark fame, get on his trail and try to stop his evil plans. Poe himself is one of the characters, so the sections of the book that are him telling the story lean heavily into his style of writing. But of course, it's mixed a little bit with more modern things since he's writing it from his current present day time. And just the layout of the whole book kind of echoes a lot of his stories. And you'll see that as you go through, kind of lots of Easter eggs. I am planning on doing further episodes of their adventures beyond this first book. So I'm probably going to touch on a lot of his stories as I go. A lot of things will echo his original stories in these new adventures. The Fall of the House of Usher is probably my favorite. because it's stories within stories, which is kind of what I've already done with my first book. But I want to delve into that even more because I just love the complexities of it. Well, I am on Instagram and Facebook and Threads. On Instagram and Threads, I am Meow Hear This. And then I'm just under my regular author name, Amanda F.T. Bowen, on Facebook. I also have a website, amandaftbowen.com. My books are currently available through that website and, of course, the ubiquitous Amazon. And yeah, just follow along on social media. I have a blog that I'm very erratic on posting, but I do post.
My name is P. Anastasia, and the P stands for Philomena, because a lot of people ask. I have written over a dozen books. I write in genres, everything from children's picture books to middle grade fantasy, which is my Poe series, young adult fantasy, young adult sci-fi. I have a little bit of paranormal romance, and I've been published for about 11 years. But writing has always been my passion, like my entire life. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always writing stories, telling stories, trying to write novels. When I was 11, I started a novel. And I have always been fascinated with Poe also, ever since I was a kid. My parents bought a Poe poetry book when I was pretty young. And I took a theater class when I was, I don't know, I want to say like 12 or 13 or something. And they asked us to perform some piece of work that we liked. And I was the weird kid who chose to do The Raven, just because I really liked it back then. I always just sort of resonated with his kind of dark, mysterious storytelling. And I always have a little bit of darkness in all of my stories as well. The book nominated is called Poe Prophecies. The first one's called The Raven, which is this one. And it is a middle grade fantasy series which mixes historical facts about Poe with a little twist of urban fantasy. The idea kind of came to me randomly, actually, one day. And I was just thinking, what if Poe's works like hid really interesting little tidbits or something? Maybe there was little secrets in there. And I started doing some research on this. And that's when I came to realize that his novel, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, kind of happened like decades later after he wrote it, with the shipwreck actually occurring and someone with the same name being cannibalized and all this. So the bottom line was, I was like, okay, this really happened. So maybe I have something here that's actually, viable and interesting. So I kind of ran with that. I have kind of tried to weave a lot of his different works into the books, depending on basically whatever it's either the title of the book either parallels something that happens in the book, or it is the piece of work of his that they have read that they discover some kind of secret from. But so let's see. So I have The Red Death, and I have Tamerlane, which is pretty rare, actually. You don't see many people talking about Tamerlane. But my next book comes out in January. It is called Lygia. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when I started working on this, I actually wanted to use Morella, but it's similar, but a slightly different story. It just didn't fit the book as well, but maybe in the future I'd like to use it. And I'd also like to use the Purloined Letter somehow, or at least try to maybe weave that into one of these books, because I haven't read it in so long, so I don't remember enough of it, but I want to put that in something as well in the future. You can find me at panastasia.com. I'm on Facebook. It's facebook.com/fluorescence books, because one of my first series is called Fluorescence. I'm on Instagram. It's at Fluorescent Ones. And you can support my work. You can come to panastasia.com, where you can actually buy my books directly from me. I will hand sign them for you. They're not like automatically signed or anything. Or you can buy them from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, just about any other major retailer. You can go to your bookstore, ask them to order them, your library, anywhere you want to get them, really.
So my name is Matthew Mercier. I'm a writer and storyteller. I'm primarily a prose writer. Poe and I is the book right here. Is my debut novel from Crystal Lake Publishing. So, but I'm also a storyteller. I do live storytelling performances with groups like The Moth and other on stage without notes. So, but how I came to Poe many a year ago, back in 2001 now, I acquired a job at the Poe Cottage in the Bronx as the caretaker and head docent of the last, it was, Poe Cottage was his last home, the last 3 years of his life. And so every weekend, Saturday from 10 to 4 and Sunday from 1 to 5, I would crawl out of my apartment, which was in the basement of the house, Poe's basement, and give tours of the cottage. Poe and I, there's a beautiful cover by Ben Baldwin. He's a great artist. Poe and I is loosely based on my time living with Edgar. When I was in the job, I always imagined, oh, this would be a great novel, but I didn't have the skill to write it. So, but it is my alter ego, Jonah Peabody, takes the job as caretaker. That's where the similarities begin and end. That's it. So it's told in alternating chapters of past and present. Jonah, oh, here comes my little black cat. Yes, it's told in alternating chapters, past and present. Jonah is a highly unreliable narrator. So as the chapters build from past to present, more of the story is revealed. He's clearly hiding something in the great Poe tradition. You're not quite sure what, so you can't trust him. That's not a spoiler. I wanted to write something that stayed true to the Poe tradition of unreliable narrators. That seemed to be his stock in trade. So yeah, so it is. It's a story of family, revenge, illness, madness, obsession, all the usual Poe tropes, but with a modern twist, a modern vernacular. Jonah's whole personality, his whole childhood is quite sad and melancholy. And we think of Poe as the master of horror, right? He wrote these horrible, stories about murderers and death, but his life was also just incredibly sad. He lost all the major women in his life. He lost his birth mother, he lost his foster mother. So his life was just a major struggle. So my alter ego, Jonah Peabody, is equally struggling with his life. And to me, that's one of the essences of Poe. Like he writes about people who are on the bottom tier of society, who are transgressive in some way, who haven't gotten a fair shot. And Poe always had a big chip on his shoulder. He didn't get to go to the best schools, albeit through some of his own self-destructive personality. So that, there's the usual, there are in corpses where they shouldn't be in this book. There's Jonah encounters a number of dead bodies. There's murder, there's revenge. So there's the usual Poe stuff, but I think the overriding mood that I wanted to create was one of melancholy. Like I said, yeah, with a little bit of more hope than Poe would have perhaps allowed. He led a very short life, died when he was only 40. So, and his stories have been well adapted. I've always been a fan of The Man of the Crowd. I don't know if you've read that one. It's a really strange story. So I'd love to try and adapt that one at some point. But there's also a great deal of conspiracy theories around how he died. As I'm sure you know, there's a whole host of theories around his death. Mm-hmm. And that has always struck me as something that might be fun to play with in fiction. I'm all over the socials. I'm on Instagram at Matthew.Mercier.poem, I think is my tag. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Threads. I haven't ventured into TikTok yet. And you can buy the book through Crystal Lake Publishing. You can buy it. They're a great small press. It's great to support small presses at this time.
My name is Zach Pencil. I'm a freelance writer and artist, and this year I'm nominated for a Saturday Visitor Award for my original play, A Christmas Carol for Edgar Allan Poe, which I wrote for the National Edgar Allan Poe Theater in Baltimore. It's kind of what it sounds like. It's a Christmas Carol, but done with the Poe twist to it. I really tried to do my best in terms of marrying Poe's life story, his history, his works, his influences, all into something that felt like a Christmas Carol, but with a Poe twist. So I'm really excited to see it. The Poe Theater will be performing it later this year, and so I'm really excited that it also got nominated this year. So the National Edgar Allan Poe Theater, they kind of put out a call for, they basically just said, A Christmas Carol, but Edgar Allan Poe. Anybody have any ideas? And I'd actually met them from the last time that I was nominated for a Saturday Visitor Award. They had been also, so I met them, and that's how I kind of got in with them. So I saw that prompt, and that just kind of got the wheels turning. I just started thinking, I was like, well, what? How does one marry those ideas? And I really got to looking into Poe's life story and his experiences, and I realized that I really think, or I really felt that there was a Scrooge-like period of his life. I especially looked at The Raven. You know, that was kind of the big turning point in his life and his career, and that came out in, I believe, late January, early February, when it was first published. So I just kind of started thinking, like, well, what was the Christmas prior to that like? And I just started imagining Poe kind of at rock bottom. You know, Virginia's wife was sick. He had just kind of had ups and downs in his career and his life. And I really just got to thinking about the stages of the ghosts in A Christmas Carol in terms of past, present, and future. And I guess the idea just really entered my head of, well, what would Poe experience if those ghosts visited him? They're kind of on the, unbeknownst to him, on the eve of the greatest success his life would know. I think that there's something really intriguing. This is a thought that I kept having. There's something really intriguing to the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. It's just, I think, because that also you can read it and see so many seeds being planted for what Lovecraft would later do, and what would kind of balloon up into like exploration horror, I guess, is the word, or cosmic horror, if you will. So I think that there's something really, some untapped potential in Arthur Gordon Pym that I would love to see in like a movie or something. I think that would be really, really cool. I don't know if you could do it on stage, maybe, but I that's just one that I feel like hasn't been done a whole lot. And I kept letting my brain kind of get carried away with like, okay, what would I do with that? You know, I primarily use Instagram as kind of my art portfolio. So just at Zach Pencil, ZACPENSOL. That's my Instagram. It's primarily artwork, but you know, I call it Zach Pencil Artist and stuff. So I also I let the stuff do a lot of heavy lifting as far as writing and everything. So that's where I've been posting a lot about this play, about the award nomination. You can also find, I've got a page on Facebook. I've pretty much any social media platform I've got something, but Instagram's really the main thing to find me on.
Okay, I'm Bonnie Winslow Chris. I'm a writer of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I write both fiction and poetry. Poe has been a favorite forever, and I like the fact that he really does write a little bit of science fiction and fantasy along with his horror and dark fantasy, which not everyone pays mind to and acknowledges. So I kind of like that aspect of it. And I've had a dozen books published, including Dragon Rain, The Enchanted Dagger, and Beneath Raven's Wing. And I also write a lot of short stories, and I've had over 200 of those published in anthologies and magazines around the world. people just kind of look at a couple pieces of his writing. They tend to, you know, maybe the Fall of the House of Usher, Always the Raven, maybe the poem Bells, um, the tell. And if you read a lot of his other work, he is a, I love words and uses wonderful language and wonderful imagery, and it's hard not to get wrapped up in it. Um, and so for me, a lot of his quotes are just wonderful, and so I kind of looked at those and thought, this is a beginning place for a book. And so using those quotes is how I actually began Shivers, Scares, and Chills. Well, I'll tell you, it was actually written for middle grade readers and up. So adults like it, young adults and middle graders, if they're very brave, I kind of say that. And I read a lot of Poe's work and started writing down the quotes that I found very kind of inspiring, and not necessarily inspiring like life inspiring, but inspiring for the beginning place for a story or for a poem. And there are 24 stories in the book and 3 poems. I felt I had to include both since Poe is famous for both of those things. And this is going to sound off the wall, but who knows, maybe I'll be back in a few years to tell you more about it. I decided that I wanted to write a science fiction novel inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. And actually, the novel features for the protagonist a female space shuttle pilot and her sentient raven co-pilot, Edgar. And each of the planetary locations is inspired by a locale from one of Poe's work. I've already used, I mentioned before, Silence of Fable, and it has a wonderful location, vivid description. It's a forest that's animated and poisoned, and a bog with hippo-like creatures and ruins, and there seems to be some sort of demon there. So I've used that for one of the locations in the novel. I've also have an underwater world, which is used in various Poe work. And right now I'm working on a location inspired by the Pit and the Pendulum. And it's going to be sort of a dark, dangerous stone structure on a mysterious planet. And obviously, you know, they've got to either rescue someone or find something there. Edgar and his pilot.
Sure. My name is Rachel Martins. I am a writer. I write mostly novels, also short stories, all horror fiction. And I first encountered Poe, like most people, in a high school English classroom. And I fell in love with his style, his stories, the level of emotion that he brought across. I loved it as a reader and as a writer. I was already writing by the time I discovered Poe. And I, at that point, I already knew that I wanted to someday be a full-time writer, that was my goal and my dream. And I had already been working on book length writing projects, but that was when I first got the idea that became the Poe series, which was to bring Edgar and his works to life in a modern world and in a unique but still true to his style and intent way. At that point, I started writing the Poe series. I rewrote and worked on the first book in the series several times over, 5 years before publishing it. And I now have 7 books in print. The most recent book that I've published is Poe Haunted Souls, the fourth book in my Poe series, which is what I submitted to the Saturday Visitor Award. So my elevator speech for the series is that the main character is a descendant of Edgar Allan Poe, and there's a family curse that takes the form of his stories. So she has to recognize them unfolding in time to prevent them. The books do go in a particular order, each continuing after the next, and Haunted Souls is book 4. I tell people that this is the one exception to the in order rule, that you could treat this as an out of order introduction to the series, because there's background information from books 1 through 3 that might be missed, but Haunted Souls is unique in that it has a self-contained story arc within it. The Edgar Allan Poe story that I'm bringing to life in Haunted Souls is the fall of the House of Usher. So in this story, the characters that our main character is visiting are her estranged grandparents that she has never met. And they're very ill, both mentally and physically, and they live in an old haunted house in Savannah's historic district. Sure. So I have a website, www.rachelmmartinsauthor.com. And that's kind of the best place to find out more about me and my books. Everything's there. There's also information there about upcoming works and events. I do a lot of events around the country, craft fairs and horror conventions and things like that, where I'm connecting with readers and signing books. And that's always up to date on there, and people can sign up for emails to be the first to hear about new publications and beta reader opportunities and things like that. I'm also on social media. I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram. My books are for sale online on my website and also on Amazon.
And the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. I spoke to one another of them, by mound and stone and tree, of things we had done ere days were near. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, and though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven. On certain ones I had not for years past did I call, and then on others who have been the honest friends of all.
upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. Thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door, quoth the raven, nevermore. This October, darken Poe's chamber door as we celebrate 180 years of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Join us for the International Edgar Allan Poe Festival and Awards, sponsored by Wells Fargo. 3 days of Poe-themed festivities, performances, vendors, music, and food to benefit the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum in Baltimore. General admission is free. Don't miss special ticketed events. Festival weekend is October 3rd through 5th. Join us in celebrating Poe's legacy in Baltimore and beyond. Visit PoeFestInternational.org for tickets and information.